All right, guys, we are live back for another Tuesday edition of our Organics Q&A. I hit the live button while Ben was mid-story, so that was interesting. But yeah, we're here to answer your questions and excited for it this week. I don't know. What do you want to talk about, Ben?
Well, we got to do a recap of the conference, right?
Did we? Oh, I did that a little bit with Chad last week.
Oh, you did? Okay.
One thing I did think of that I don't know if I mentioned in that live that I thought was an important thing that someone brought up was the Dram guy mentioned that, well, two things. So he mentioned that spray nozzles wear out, which I
Yeah.
didn't realize. So your spray efficacy can go down over time just by using a nozzle too long. And number two, probably the more important point from Dram around water is that when you water a plant, a mist is much better than fully soaking the plant. Like just drenching the plant to where it's dripping is actually much less effective for spray efficacy and getting coverage than it is doing a very fine mist due to the particle size
Yeah, I
and
was going to say.
everything. So I thought those were good reminders for folks around
Yeah.
spraying.
And all that, like, all of this just speaks to, again, like the need, not that, I mean, the need sounds like it's a job, but like almost like the responsibility or even the fun of like, once you think you kind of know everything, there's always something new, like the nozzle thing. Like, I never thought that that would be a thing. And so, it's really cool when you've got people who are open and accessible to sharing, like, oh, no one's thought of this, and not keeping that to themselves. And I just think that's really cool. And, kudos to you and everybody who believes in that same vein, who, attended the conference and stuff. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So one of the things, just getting back to the spraying comment, is I know a lot of people and even some of these other companies are selling paint sprayers. And that was one of the things he talked about was you hear people say that, whatever, Ceph oil, plant
Yeah.
Lost Coast therapy, whatever product you're spraying does not work. And some of that is just the efficacy of spray coverage that you're getting due to the fact you're not using an optimal sprayer. Paint sprayers
Right.
are made for spraying paint.
Yeah.
Horticultural sprayers are made for spraying horticultural products. And
Right.
even then you have to have the right product. Is it something that should be in an atomizer? Should it be in a sprayer? Should it be in a
Right.
fogger?
Can it
Not
handle an
everything can
oil-based
be used.
product? Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
So I don't know, something to think about for folks with the start of this show. So I see there's a question for Brandon about DJ Short's flow. Obviously, we can't answer that. Unfortunately, Brandon is really sick. He picked up something either on the way back, or at the conference, and he has been pretty laid out with the flu the last week. So
Yeah.
he's not able to join us today, unfortunately. Hopefully he'll be feeling better soon. So send him your positive thoughts. All right, well, let's dive into the questions then, if there's nothing else. Oh, I will mention before we do, I was telling Ben before this, I'm feeling a little feisty today. I just put up a post about meat industry byproducts in response to a conversation I was having with Build a Soil on their comment thread about whether or not anyone should be using blood or bone or feather meal in their gardens. His position is that because the meat industry is terrible, which there's no doubt, it's awful. His position is that we don't want to use those products because the industry is bad, so they're dirty and therefore do not belong as fertilizers in your garden. I looked into this to see if they really were dirty inputs, and not in the sense of like how they were ethically treated, because we know that that's awful.
Yeah.
There's no argument there, but whether or not there was PFAS coming through, like forever chemicals, whether or not there were pesticides, hormones, heavy metals, all of those things. And what I found, I did a video on it already, actually, was that these were actually way cleaner than ocean-based inputs. And you, as someone who did a lot of work in marine biology through college, working on your PhD, can probably vouch for that in the sense of
Yeah,
how these things accumulate in marine-based
totally.
animals.
And so I talked about that a little bit briefly at the conference at the beginning of our talk. There are these two kind of, I don't know, not theories, but two kind of principles that we were talking about: bioaccumulation and bioaccumulation, biomagnification. So two different things. Accumulation is when the same organism or same species really consumes the same thing over and over and over. And like, let's say you're a fish and you eat a shrimp, and that shrimp has, for argument's sake, zero point 0.1 gram of arsenic. And then you keep eating shrimp and shrimp and shrimp. So obviously, it's easy to see how that would build up in that fish's body over time, right? And then on top of that, because you've got really long, complex food chains in the ocean environment, um, you get this thing for biomagnification as well, which is now you're consuming that little fish that has taken its life to consume X amount of arsenic, for example, is getting eaten by a bigger fish, and then by a bigger fish, and then a sea lion comes along, and then maybe a shark or what have you. So that's how these very minuscule amounts of like heavy metals and other toxicities build up in organisms over time. And to Tad's point about like a land-based ecosystem, especially if you're already a vegetarian, like a cow, you don't go through all of those trophic stages to get to the biomagnification, right? You're going straight from plant, which might amplify, like a rice hull, for example, but you don't have to go the thing that ate the plant, that ate that thing, that ate that thing, that ate that thing, that then go to cow, right? So it's a much cleaner, less
Shorter.
it's a shorter, right? It's a much more straight line from source to input. Where in the ocean, it's really rare for something to go from, like you're talking about whales for the most part, right? You can actually do it that way because you're a filter feeder, and your risk at amplification decreases with how close you feed to the bottom of the food chain, right? So when we're talking about amplification and magnification, it really depends on how that input, how many things have been consumed prior to you seeing that in a bag. That's a long-winded way of explaining it all. So
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. Like I said, I dive into it a lot more in that other video.
yeah.
I think I titled it like fake organic or something, because Build a Soul has been saying that they're not truly organic products because of this
Mhm.
conversation that we're having here. So yeah, I suggest people check it out. Give us your thoughts. Again, my thing is, this is a waste stream for an industry that's awful, but it's a clean waste stream. Is it better that we take these waste streams and put them into landfills, or is it better that we use them to grow new plants? Because phosphate is phosphate at the end of the day. We can get that from bone meal, for example. We can get it a lot cleaner from bone meal than we can from fish bone meal. The plant cannot tell the difference once it's phosphate. It's everything that's coming along with it. Those are the unclean things
Yeah.
that Jeremy at Build a Soul mentions. But where those really exist is not so much with the bone meal, unless you believe that the ethics of how the cow was treated um,
Yeah.
somehow make it into the final plant, which
So
is a whole separate conversation that I don't
yeah,
really want to get into.
I don't want to get into it, but I do feel like it does conflate the messages and the things that we're trying to get across, right? Where it's very, I think, more or less widely understood and accepted that if you say the word organic, that's a good thing, right? That's what most people would associate that with. Arsenic is completely organic, but we don't want to keep that in our soils and in our plants. Cow manure is completely organic, but you're not so like there are things there. It's tough to just say organic equals good, because that's not always the case. And if we say organic equals good and we start talking about things that are organic that we don't want in our systems, that's not to say that we're anti-organic, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
not, we're talking about multiple different things, and definitions can definitely change really from person to person. And it's kind of the same with sustainability, right? Where, to your point, Tad, where we're talking about if we're really trying to use the whole animal from a sustainability standpoint, what better way to do it than use that remaining bits of the animal that we can kickstart a new ecosystem, a new food chain, right? A new product or something that
Mm,
is applicable or useful. So it just makes you step back, or I hope it makes folks step back to think that, like, if we're really going for sustainability, then there are some things that, like I said, I'm not condoning slaughterhouse, like that, those things are crazy. But the waste products of them are waste unless we want to use them as a beneficial input to create something that isn't a waste. So it's just
mhm.
another way to think about sustainability as well.
And the fishing industry is equally awful in terms of what it's doing, destroying our environment, and bycatch, which is all the creatures and fish and animals that get caught
Right.
in those nets, besides our target species that we're trying to harvest, um, is pretty awful. Yeah, that's just the whole argument with tuna and dolphins that we had for years. So
Yeah.
the ocean fishing is not great, but there's some really interesting comments that I want to pop up
Great.
on the screen.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about these topics, and then I'll come back to the questions that people posted at the beginning of the show. So the first one related to this topic was, what if the grass the cow eats was grown with human manure? Just found out this happens around me. So human manure is literally composted human poop. There's companies around here that do it. They claim that the final product is clean. I was always skeptical of this, and in recent years, New York Times actually last year, I believe, published an article about this. They're finding that what's making it through there is the PFAS, these forever chemicals, are making it the um, into the human manure, and then they're being taken up by the plant. So potentially that's so I'm not here to say that all blood meal, bone meal, feather meal is clean. I'm just saying the research that I've seen, that, and there isn't a lot that I've seen, but what I have seen shows that it's cleaner than what we're getting from ocean-based sources. So it is possible that if these cows were eating grass that was grown with human manure, that some of that could have made it through into the cow. But from what I've seen, the other one here too, it talks about antibiotics and hormones. These were not showing up in the bone or the blood meal of the cattle, which kind of surprised me, honestly. I expected an opposite result. Now, feather meal is a little dirtier than blood and bone, but again, still cleaner than fish, and even some of the other sources like some of the plant-based sources too. We can't assume just because it was grown by a plant or bioaccumulated by a plant that it's necessarily cleaner.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are similar question. Growth hormones, steroids, pesticides that the cows consume. They're not bioaccumulating. They're probably more likely to end up in the feces, the manure,
Right.
than accumulating in the bones or in the blood of the animals, based on the research
Yeah.
I've seen. And again, you can view that research on the other YouTube posts that I made.
Totally.
So
And that's what's really important here is everyone knows that saying, right? Like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Not what everything that goes into the cow stays in the cow. So there are certain things and chemicals, and you get into all sorts of physiological pathways and all that kind of stuff. Some things that are not helpful to the body, like pesticides and things, those will likely move their way through and not be accumulated into the bone that you guys are actually amending with. So um, it's not as simple as input in, that means it's coming out in your bagged inputs. So just another caveat to kind of think about. And like to Tad's point, I can't speak to every possible source or farm or anything like that, but it's not as easy as this goes in, therefore it must stay in.
I do want to address this. This is a good comment. I think using the waste product from an awful industry, the meat industry, keeps the industry going. Every little bit of money they can make helps keep factory farming industry afloat. I would push back on this a little bit. I think it's a fair argument to not want to use anything from the industry because it feels like you're supporting it. But the meat industry is going strong. It's not going to stop producing or slaughtering cattle just because we're not using a waste stream from it. It would literally just go into landfills. I don't know that this is necessarily um, a valid argument in that regard, but that's fair. And honestly, if I thought that the conversation was around how can we more sustainably utilize these products, or how can we improve what we're doing, then I think that's an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But if we're doing it to promote products, saying these are bad, or these products are bad, these products are good, then it feels more like marketing than science to me. And to be fair, I don't even use these products in my soils just because of the way we originally formulated. But I don't want to demonize them. That's my big thing is if you are living in a community where they're accessible and they're affordable, I think they should absolutely be a consideration as a fertilizer in your garden.
Yeah, I
So
think if we're really trying to move the needle on the offal industry, this idea of mass slaughterhouses and stuff like that, they're going to feel that movement much more directly by just consuming less meat because that's the product they're actually selling. These
yeah.
residual revenue streams, that's just, don't get me wrong, that is money in their bank, but that's not the product they're selling. They're not raising these animals for bone meal. They're raising them for consumption. If the consumption goes down, they're going to see that and will have a much bigger impact on the industry than any of these, input streams that we're talking about using for our plants would do.
All right, I don't want to spend the whole day complaining about blood and bone meal. So let's get into some of these other questions. I'm going to go back a little bit here. All right, this question is, what considerations do I need to make when using wood chips for an aeration amendment? Okay, good question. This is a complicated question, unfortunately, because there's a lot of different sources for wood chips right now, or what people are using are calling wood-based substrates, essentially bark or other chips. And they're going to have different pH levels. They're going to have different sizes. And so they're going to all have different impacts on aeration. There is research to show that using wood-based substrates like this can replace, even fully, perlite in potting soils. This is some new research that's come out in the last couple of years. But I think you have to be very careful because you are bringing in a lot of carbon with the wood chips. So you need to balance that accordingly. You need to account for the pH. You need to look at your particle size and make sure they're not too large. And then also the species of wood that you're using. So you're going to have to play around with it, I guess, is what I would say based on what the research shows on it.
Tad, do
Yeah,
you
I don't
know,
know. Any
just a
thoughts?
question. Yeah, like, do you know of many farms that have been using it for a long time? Because for me, again, I'm always trying to think about like how this would look, not in the first round, but the 15th.
Yeah, so that's a problem I've been running into because I'm trying to formulate soils right now for the East Coast, and over there, all your only options for aeration really are perlite or these wood substrates, maybe lava rock. But that is a serious consideration. Is over time the wood chips are going to break down, so you would need to add more aeration and account for that. Um, the vendors of these wood substrates that I've seen typically think they're good for 6 months to a year. Unlike pumice, which lasts pretty much indefinitely, which is what we're using in our soils right now. So at the very least, maybe start off as 10% of your total aeration rather than trying to go completely as a replacement, and then aim for a particle size that is, I don't know, I'm staring at um, some coins on my desk right now. I like to have old coins, so maybe like this, a penny and a quarter. I would aim probably penny or smaller, just even a dime sized particle size in general, greater surface area. Um,
Yeah, I can see it kind of maybe leading to like bulk density issues, where you're getting more compaction and then yeah. Well, To be determined, I think, for the long-term feasibility of it.
Yeah. I would say Dub Smoke, that's awesome. You're a year in. That's great to hear. 5 gallon pots is tricky for living soil. So if you're pulling it off, that's great. You definitely don't have as much buffering capacity as people in larger containers, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. Obviously, you're showing that it's possible. So good job. Garage grower question: leaf temperature or room temperature? We just had this conversation in terms of with Nadia, Dr. Greenhouse, about calculating VPD, and she really prefers room temperature over leaf temperature. The only place I really look at leaf temperature is if your lights are too close or you're getting a lot of heat off of those lights, in which case you would want to check your leaf temperature. Um, but in general, because you have so many leaves in a given room, they can't all be the same temperature. That's why we typically use room temperature as a good gauge for calculating VPD and other environmentals.
I'll also say, of course, cultivar dependent too, right? Because sometimes you'll get cultivars with a little bit lighter shade of green. The chloroplast may be a bit different or not as tightly packed. Different cultivars might have a darker color. And so that in itself is going to be a covariate in driving leaf temperature. So again, you could do it, but there's a lot more variability just based on the genetics of the plant itself that could be giving you some tricky information.
All right. Questions. What about an oil diffuser? I probably wouldn't recommend it just because I don't know how you're going to get any sort of even application over an area with one. And I think it might cause an issue for dispersion. And I don't know how, these products act in an oil diffuser. You'd be much better off spraying them. If we're talking about oils applied as a potential pesticide or fungicide. Awesome. Thanks for the feedback on the conference. I do want to mention we've already confirmed that we're planning on doing it next year, the last weekend of August. So if you wanted to make it this year and you couldn't, or you made it and you want to go back next year, as of right now, the plan is to do it again. We're going to start planning and meeting up probably end of the year, early January, to start announcing things and setting it up. But you heard it here first. As of right now, the plan is to do it again because it was really successful and fun.
At
next
Collective?
year.
Because I'm learning
At
too.
Collective.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
at Collective. Yeah.
Awesome.
They're on board.
Very cool.
All right, bone char. So I don't have a lot of experience with bone char. My guess is, though, just from experience with chars in general, is that this product, I would have expected it to have more potassium. And I would be concerned of heavy metals because I've yet to find something with that much phosphorus and not have high levels of arsenic. There just is not a really good clean source for that I'm aware of. So that would be my concern. I would ask for a heavy metal analysis or do some of your own testing. Cannabis Chem Lab will test something like this for you for $99. It's a really great price for heavy metal testing. It's the best I'm aware of in the industry. Oh, I like this question. I think this one's interesting. So Green Planet Plant Guard. Okay, I'm not familiar with Green Planet. I'm not familiar with Plant Guard, so keep this in mind. But it says potassium silicate on the label, but has 0.05 SiO2, that's silicon dioxide, but 3% potassium. GrowTech Pro Silicate, again, not a product I'm familiar with, has 7.5% potassium dioxide, but 4% potassium. This to me could be just a rate issue, but the ratios are so different. And it makes me wonder if the GrowTech Pro Silicate to me looks like a better product. Just if all I saw was this, that's the product I would buy because the amount of silica you're getting in the first one is so low. And I'm not sure of the form of SI that you should be getting out of potassium silicate, but I thought it was something different than silicon dioxide. I would have to look that up. I don't have that memorized, but this is a good reason to look at labels because honestly, I wouldn't pay anything for that that Plant Guard product because potassium is super cheap and the amount of silica in it is negligible. Honestly, that's really low. So yeah, great question. All right. Let me get caught up here. Sorry, guys. I have to scroll down and get past some of the comments. Yes, there is a big issue with PFAS in sewage sludge compost. Absolutely. Then, like I said, the New York Times wrote a great article on this. Folks should check it out if they have access to it. Rusty Nails mentions kelp. Yeah, kelp is another well-known bioaccumulator. It does contain sodium. It will also accumulate heavy metals. So we tend to get arsenic and other higher levels of heavy metals in there, as well as chlorides, which we want to limit as well. So kelp has a lot of different plant benefits. There's a lot of great research around it. It just needs to be used appropriately, which means in fairly low ratios relative to the other things that we add to our soils if we're being tested for heavy metals. All right, let's see here. Bat guano. I do not use bat guano personally. I think it's whenever I see soils that have high levels of available phosphorus, it's generally they're using phosphoric acid, or they're using a high P bat guano. So they are really good at giving you available phosphate. You do have to be careful. I know some cannabis growers in New York, I think last year, died from histoplasmosis, which is a bacteria known to be found in guanos. And so it's kind of a nasty disease. So handle with care. The biggest issue for me with bat guano is the sustainability aspect of it. Like someone else mentions here in the chat. It's just, it's really tough. The way they harvest it is not great, and there's a huge fossil fuel cost to get it from the tropics typically to the United States. So trying to limit those products that come from far away is a good idea. And also thinking about the ecology of the environment from which they're being either mined or harvested, things like that. All right. Do you plan to restock Amio Root on the KiS Organics website? I'm pretty sure it should be in stock. I will have to check with Cindy on that. That's a great question. So yes, shoot me an email if you don't see it back in stock later today, and we'll get back to you. All right, Steve asked another question. Is more biochar an option for aeration? Yes, absolutely. It's just expensive. And it tends to be alkaline, so it will raise your pH. Those two things being said, it's a much more stable carbon source than wood chips, so it will last longer in the soil. It's going to have other plant benefits as well. But again, I would limit it to 10% of your total media. There is some people that have gone higher and had success, but just to play it on the safe end, if you're experimenting, that's where I would recommend starting. All right. Dimitri asks, why does water from my dehumidifier come in at a ridiculously low pH in the range of 4.3 to 4.7? I typically mix it with regular water to get it up to the 6.0 range. Ben, do you want to tackle this one, or do you want me to answer it?
Go for it, dude.
All right. So this probably has to do with the fact, again, that the water coming out of your dehumidifier is probably very low in alkalinity.
Yeah.
So alkalinity is the ability of essentially the buffering capacity of your water. And if that is low, your water can fluctuate in pH quite easily. You've probably seen that where the pH in your reservoir is continually rising over time. That's probably due to having a low alkalinity, and the oxygen interacting with it is raising the pH. So not a huge concern. Water that is low in alkalinity tends to be low in ppms. That's essentially what we're talking about here. So
right.
You could always test it or get an irrigation suitability analysis done. There are ways to reuse dehumidifier water, but you have to be careful because you could be picking up stuff coming out of, through your dehumidifier, depending on what it comes in contact with. So that's where, if you really want to do it right, you could do testing. on it. But in general, I know a lot of people are reusing their dehu water. It's probably fine for a home grower. Oh, this is a good one. Is blood meal high in iron, and should I be concerned about it in regarding mineral soil balance? Am I still going?
I'm trying to think. I don't think so.
It actually is. It is high in iron. Yeah, because I've seen research on it.
Oh, sorry. I meant
or
to
seen
to
analysis.
the point we're worrying that it was going to start tipping the scales at the amendment rates we use.
So there's two things there, and you brought up a good one, which is the dosage makes the poison, and so we're not using it at terribly high doses because we're primarily using it for nitrogen. But iron is also not readily available to your plants in the pH ranges that we typically grow in, so it's not really a concern at all. I would not be worried about it affecting your mineral balance, because even soils with high iron tend to perform just fine, provided we don't drop, super low pH. And if if our pH is low enough for us to have a huge iron uptake issue, then we have other issues happening in terms of nutrient availability beyond the iron. It's not our biggest concern. So,
yeah.
Okay, here's someone brings up that homemade bone char can be very high in sodium. I can't comment on that because I've never tried it, but I will say that excessive levels of sodium build up in the soil. We then have to flush our soil to remove that sodium, and that's a pain in the butt. So if you can avoid sodium, more extra sodium in your soil, it's going to be better, because too much sodium raises the EC of your soil, the electrical conductivity. And when that happens, it puts osmotic pressure on your roots. It makes it harder for them to transport or uptake water and nutrients. So that's why we try to limit sodium and chlorides in our soils. Thank you, Green Shed Gardens. So getting back to those potassium silicate ones, they're Canadian brands. Yeah, I was unfamiliar. I will say, if you're looking for potassium silicate, the easiest thing to do is just get your hands on some AgSil 16H. I mean, we sell it, but a lot of other people do too. You can mix your own potassium silicate for pennies on the dollar, much less than what these brands are charging you. It's the same thing. Everyone's getting it from the same place. So you can save a lot of money that way. I use kelp as food supplement for horses, so I assume it's fairly tested for heavy metals, right? Yeah, again, this is all about the dosage. So the amount that your horse is eating relative to its body weight is perfectly fine for the horse. It's not going to kill it, but it is going to accumulate over time. If the horse was eating excessive levels of kelp, it could eventually have issues with too much arsenic or one of these other heavy metals. But again, it's fine. We eat seaweed and other stuff. I eat seaweed at least. But I do it in low enough doses that I'm not concerned about it. It's the same with tuna fish. That's why they recommend you only eat so much tuna a week to limit the amount of mercuries, because tuna bioaccumulates mercury. Ben can
want me to do it
spout
again?
on that if you want.
Yeah, same idea, right? It's just the amount you eat over a given amount of time, and what those dosages are within that certain time frame.
Cool. Oh, okay. Here's some good feedback. The guys that died from bat poop in New York were harvesting their own from someone's bat infested attic. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, probably without appropriate PPE too, it sounds like. So yes, just be careful. Even with things like, I was just talking to someone about diatomaceous earth.
Yep.
I had a huge outbreak of dust mites. I had a 40-foot container that we stored all of our feed for our feed store in. And one day I noticed dust mites. It was in the middle of the day, and I was like, okay, we have to get all the feed out of here. We have to clean it, and then we have to move all the feed back in. Staff they were not on board. I was there till, no joke, 2 a.m. I figured out by the end of it, I had lifted something like 60,000 pounds worth of weight over those 12 hours. It was the worst day of my life. But moral of the story was, after I cleaned everything out, I spread a bunch of diatomaceous earth around to kill the dust mites. And I put on a mask, like a respirator, when I did it. And then I took a blower. This is what not to do. I took a blower and I blew it all out of there after I was done to blow out all the dust mites and hopefully dead dust mites and everything and start over. Well, what I didn't think about was my eyes. I should have been wearing goggles because I ended up having the worst bloodshot eyes from getting the dust into my eyes. It was stupid. It was a long time ago. I didn't think about it. PPE is so important. We got to take care of our health. So just something to think about with any product, whatever you're using, be sure to read the MSDS on it. That's the material safety data sheet, so that you're using it appropriately and not putting your health at risk. All right, man. I feel like I'm doing all the talking here. Let's see here if we can get you in on one.
Let's do it.
Are you familiar with fermented plant extracts, Ben?
Not really. We don't use a whole lot of them. I've heard previous growers have some experience with them. I haven't seen a whole lot of, like I said, everything we've done at our facility has been more or less evidence and data driven. I haven't seen a whole lot of trials about the benefits of these fermented plant extracts. I know they can go a little sideways and start adding maybe some not beneficial things to your soils. So we've steered clear, is all I could say from our facility standpoint.
Yeah. So the issues with fermented plant extracts are that they tend to be variable. People are using different plants to extract nutrients from.
Grown from different sources, different locations.
And the testing that we did on some of the commercial ones was it was high in sodium and chlorides. Again, those two things that we try to avoid. And people were unintentionally adding them by putting in these plant extracts. Now, the pros for using them is that it's essentially free nutrients unless you're buying the product. There's also maybe some enzymatic properties and other things in there that could be good, but there just isn't a lot of research around them. It's all anecdotal from what I've seen. Some people swear by them, but then I wonder also what was the limiting factor of growth there? What were they getting from these that they couldn't get from a more reliable source? Right. So absolutely something you can experiment with, but try and do a trial,
Totally.
Only spray or apply to half your plants and see what kind of a response you get and decide if it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Water from dehumidifier can pick up heavy metals if it's low in ppms and then comes in contacts with metals that can leach. Yes, that can be an issue.
Yep.
Yes, so we are working on East Coast distribution. Freight is one of the biggest limiting factors for a soil company. It doesn't make sense to ship soils from Washington to New York. So we are looking into other options there, but it takes a lot of time and research and testing to formulate a soil mix. So we are in that process, but it's not fast. And unfortunately, what we can get access to on the East Coast in terms of, like I said, pumice versus perlite and some of these other things is not optimal. And I don't want to release a soil unless I can stand behind it and say it's going to do as well as the soil that we're producing right now. So it's complicated. We've been working on it for years. I haven't given up. I'm hoping in the next year we'll have something. So good question. And I can talk more about soil formulating soils if people are interested. So the K to SI ratio on these two products, I'd have to go back and look at what potassium silicate is, but the one with the higher SiO2 definitely look closer to potassium silicate, again, off the top of my head, versus the other one where the SI levels were negligible. That's what I would expect to see overall in a soil, much less in a concentrated, promoted, marketed silica product. All right, here's a good question. Let's talk about it. So Jeremy at Build a Soil, I'll just throw it out there. He said it was disingenuous of me to comment on this topic because I don't smoke a lot. I know as part of this culture, everyone smokes together, people smoke a lot, and I totally respect and think that's great. My endocannabinoid system is not the same as most people's that are in the cannabis industry. It just doesn't hit me the same. My brother, my father, absolutely. Me, different. So I don't consume a lot. I do consume occasionally, but it doesn't make me a more productive, happier, healthier human being. I don't think that means I can't have a seat at the table, or I can't talk about cultivation science, or I can't contribute to the industry, because I have no business, commenting on flavor. I have a horrible sinus issues. I can't smell very well. I'm not going to talk to you about the effects of cannabis because, again, they're different for me than for a lot of people. But I do think when it comes to talking about soil science, we need to separate out the individual from the information. So that's my 2 cents on it. I don't know.
I can,
Anything you'll say,
I,
Ben?
I can add to it too. Like, I'll at least just speak for me. I'm not in the business of producing smoke. I'm not. I'm in the business of producing the healthiest plant we possibly can. What you guys do after that, that's up to everybody individually. You can smoke it, you could make a necklace, a wreath, whatever you guys want. We're trying to get you guys the healthiest, biggest plant we possibly can using sustainable and organic inputs. That's where we live. And we've got testing now to confirm that these methods and methodologies, materials produce very well balanced cannabinoids and expressions and secondary metabolites and all those things. And to Tad's point, everyone's endocannabinoid system is completely different, which is why you see the crazy amount of genetic variation you see in the cannabis market. People like different things. So whether or not you smoke or not, I mean, I guess to in a certain social aspect, yeah, that could make it a little bit more of whether or not someone's qualified to weigh in or not. But when it comes to just growing a plant, I don't know if that necessarily has much weight at all. Talking about the culture and what all that stuff, absolutely. But talking about from a business standpoint and a science standpoint, especially, it doesn't really jive because a human response to an experience is about as objective as somebody can use for data. If you want to talk to me about testing results and cannabinoid expressions and THC percentages and limonene and all these different things on a paper that has a value to it, I'm happy to have that conversation. But what someone's unique experience is to a certain flower grown at a certain facility, grown at a certain round, is just not repeatable, and it's not scientifically, there's no scientific weight to it, and it doesn't impact how we treat our formulations and how we treat our methods for growing. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I got into this because of the science side. We know everything there is to know about how to grow corn and soy. Cannabis is really exciting because we get to be part of the research. Some of the stuff some of the research that Ben and I have done together has actually been published and shared in university courses on cannabis, which is really cool. We could never have done that in corn. I've gotten to speak in multiple university classes on cannabis cultivation and soil science because I'm a part of this industry, and I'm really grateful for that. I love learning new things, and I love that we're constantly learning new things about this plant because I think it's a really, really amazing plant. And I think cultivating it is a ton of fun. And I think I'm pretty good at cultivating it. Too, I'm not so good at smoking it. So that was way longer of an answer than you probably ever wanted. And I'm not picking on you, Penny. Like, it's a perfectly reasonable question. I've just been getting a lot of heat on social media from people lately about about this topic. And so I just thought, since we're on here, I'm feeling, like I said, I was feeling a little feisty. You might as well address it. So there you go. All right, moving on to something more more interesting. I can only afford a soil test every few rounds. Is it at all useful in between tests to test EC and pH on a slurry test to get a ballpark estimate of fertility? Yes, that is the best thing you can
100%.
do. Absolutely. If you have that tool already, test it every round so that you know when you reamend if you're hitting the same targets as when you were when you're soil testing. And yes, it's not going to tell you what is making up that EC, like what minerals are making up
Yeah.
your nutrient profile, but it's going to give you a rough idea of how much fertility you have, and
Yeah.
that can help you not over or underfeed your plants too much. So that's a great question and a great tool.
The way I think about it and the way we use it is it's just kind of like a thermometer. Like if you're taking your temperature, it'll tell you whether or not you have a fever, but it won't tell you why. Right. So it's just a very rough diagnostic tool to make sure that you're healthy or in the right zone of healthy. But beyond that, then yeah, you need to get into a deeper level of analysis to see why that EC or why that pH is happening. But it's still just as valuable as anything else, like taking your temperature to see if you have a fever or not. And you could do that whenever, right? We do that every week in all of our rooms at our facility. We're tracking EC throughout the grow. And once you start doing that, then you understand the lag time it takes between taking that measurement and how much time it needs to take, depending on where you are in the cycle that you're growing, for any adjustment to be picked up again by that EC or pH pen. So yeah, and these are the kinds of data that it doesn't take long to collect, it doesn't take long to write down, and it can be invaluable at problem solving an issue you don't even exist that know that exists yet later on in your growing. So it's really, really awesome to do, and it just makes everybody a better grower for doing it.
Now, Rusty Nails joins our chat pretty consistently. We don't always agree on everything, but I do appreciate all of his comments, and we definitely agree on this. So you can absolutely grow without testing. It's always better to apply less than more. You can always add more. It's much harder to remove things. So that's great advice. And he also does say that if he does see an issue, he would test. You can also do tissue testing, like leaf tissue testing. That is another option. I've done it before when I've had issues with my plants. It's expensive, so it's not something I would fall back on. But if you want to know exactly what's going on with your plant in the moment, that is another tool in your tool chest. I see. The question Acid Stormtroop was saying he was feeding his plants horse or food grade quality seaweed or kelp meal. So I just want to touch on this because most of the kelp meal products on the market, not all, most are Ascophyllum nodosum, North Atlantic sea kelp. It's the most widely researched and most widely harvested and used species of kelp meal. And that's the one that we do use in our soils too for that reason. If you're using a different source than Ascophyllum nodosum, I would suggest researching it to make sure you understand where it's being harvested from, what the nutrient profile of it is, what the heavy metals are. But for the most part, food grade quality in this case is probably referring more to how that material is handled versus what's actually in the material. So I don't think you need to pay extra for food grade quality in this regard. That's going to carry a price premium versus just getting kelp meal. If they're both Ascophyllum nodosum, that North Atlantic sea kelp, they're going to be essentially about the same. There's a few different brands. They're going to have slightly different levels of arsenic and things like that. But in general, I wouldn't worry about it. Acadian is one of the largest companies that produces kelp. Tidal is another one. We have the heavy metal tests on our website. You guys can go look at those for free on the product pages. But you can absolutely use it in small amounts without any issues. Oh, I like this question. Ben, why don't you try and tackle it first? I can always jump in. My DIY KiS soil is starting to become all worm castings. Should I add more peat? It seems like it doesn't need any more pumice.
You can. What you're dealing with is a healthy ecosystem, and that soil compaction is going to happen over time. So every now and then you might have to fluff it up a little bit. I don't know if you need to add peat per se. In between rounds, getting a nice turnover. I don't know if you're part of the no-till sort of that sort of thing or not, but this is one of the pros of doing a kind of between round rake in of amendments to try to rejuvenate some of that, to keep that soil density from not getting too compact. But the fact that you do have a lot of castings is a really good sign. But you're thinking along the right track where you don't want to lose, because that's about as close to sand as our soils get, as when you get a lot of castings in there.
Yeah. So the question of this is really your bulk density of your soil. Your bulk
Yeah,
density is increasing over time. That organic matter is slowly breaking down into smaller and smaller particle sizes, and so that's really your biggest issue. I'd be inclined to add a little peat to it. Honestly, I think that's a good option, provided you don't need more pumice. Usually, I would recommend adding more aeration in the form of pumice before adding
yeah,
something like peat moss, because but really you need to evaluate the tilth of your soil, sort of the texture and the physical properties. How well does it drain? How well does it hold on to water? What kind of habitat does it have for microbes? Those are the sort of things that we look at when we're talking about physical properties
yeah.
of media like soil.
And this kind of very quickly ties back to the somewhat recent discussion about wood chips as a input to try to your soil for aeration, or to help decrease bulk density. But over time, it's all organic, so you might end up in a similar situation as to what we're dealing with Spencer here.
All right, question. When you mix the pumice for the first time, do you clean it or sterilize it if it came from a material yard? We do not. We mix it directly in. We don't have an effective way of like treating it in that regard. I guess if you had a way of heat steaming it, that wouldn't hurt. But in general, it's not a huge vector for pests and pathogens. There's not a lot there that there really are either are all that excited about. So I'd be much more concerned about your compost or any of your other amendments that are coming in, for the most part, more so than the pumice. But yeah, one other option too is if you are mixing soils, after you mix soils, applying something like an aerated compost tea, or even more specifically a trichoderma product, would help, or Bavaria. Some of those are more predatory microorganisms that will help with pests and pathogens when mixing soils. But personally, I don't really worry about it. It tends to be pretty clean. If it doesn't look clean, then that might be another issue, but it's a mined product. In my experience, it's pretty clean. All right, Rusty's back. If you smoked, you'd know why we need bat guano. LOL. So that's a fair comment. I can't say I could tell you the difference between bat guano and non-bat guano grown weed. What you're really referring to, and I'm guessing you may already know this, is really secondary metabolite production. So we're talking about how does bat guano impact cannabinoid production and terpene production in a given cultivar or genetic profile. And some people swear by that. I think as a scientist, we can find other sources to get that same profile of expression, at least on an analysis from a chemistry perspective, like from a lab. But I am not here to tell anyone that there is a wrong way to grow weed. If you grow it and this is the way you like it, then awesome. There's a lot of ways to grow this plant. So I'm just talking about it from a sustainability perspective, or a pest or pathogen or risk management perspective, not from a secondary metabolite production angle. So that's fair. I have zero experience with chlorine dioxide. I know of a lot of very safe things for dealing with pretty much every pest or pathogen out there. So if we knew what you were trying to deal with, we could probably give you a better recommendation rather than playing around with some of these chemicals that could also be fairly caustic or dangerous. So that's all I have to say on that. Oh, and I meant to mention this. We have Brandon. He handles the smoking part. He's our street cred.
He handles the smoking part for him and maybe everybody in his zip code.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
amazing.
So if we ever have a question about the effects or the taste or any of those sorts of things, Brandon's our guy. So hopefully we get him back here soon to talk about
And
that.
I will say, like, it's nice to have that voice on our team. It's totally a valid point to make sure that we're working with something that people who want to really enjoy this plant want how to enjoy it. So what the really amazing thing about me and Tad, who are a little bit more on the sciencey side of things, but have Brandon in almost every meeting we're in, we get to talk about this stuff and make sure that it's checking all the boxes. It's not just science driven with no real functional impact, and he's not coming out with anything that's not science backed. So it's really nice. It's really nice to be able to have that conversation.
You guys are cracking me up.
Ah,
Okay, so I want to address this a little bit. Yeah, so the whole goal with growing cannabis is the effect, right? So we're talking about how do we create this psychoactive experience that is positive for our endocannabinoid system. And again, we already talked about how everybody is different. That being said, we absolutely know tips and tricks and tools for increasing secondary metabolite production. I've done a lot of interviews with researchers on this topic. We can get very high terpene expression and very high cannabinoid expression in plants utilizing science. What I was referring to with the bat guano thing is this sort of like nuanced, personal, subjective perspective where if you grow a certain cultivar a certain way and it just hits you just right, and you use bat guano and you swear it's bat guano, then I'm not here to tell you otherwise. I think that's what I was trying to get across. So, but yeah, we definitely do know a lot about how to increase secondary metabolite
yeah,
production in
and
plants.
had a couple of 2 points on that. One, the plant doesn't know it's bat guano, right? The plant's breaking this down to a molecular level and dealing with it that way. So whether or not there are things in relative abundances and certain chemical compounds or enzymes that are in bat guano that the plants can get to that cannot be given in another way, that's a totally valid question and worth some research. I don't know of any off the top of my head, but when we start thinking about these main, just names of things, even watering, right? Like we think of a watering schedule. Plants don't know what a Tuesday is. So what we think may be one thing or not is a different perspective from the plant. And to communicate with the plant, this is going to sound super hippy dippy. We need to speak their language, and that's usually just on a very chemical compound, what have you. Now, again, if guano can produce those things that other things can't, then absolutely there's something there. And that would be really super worth researching. The second thing I want to add is I know a lot of us are talking about living soil systems. Um, if we're trying to create the same exact cannabinoid expression round after round, even using the same genetics, you're probably going to have a bad time. There is so much ecology and biology interacting in that soil throughout the round. You're dealing with likely hundreds, if not thousands, of generations of bacteria just from the time you plant to the time you harvest that are going to be wildly different from by the time you plant your next round. So that's one of the kind of arguably disadvantages of growing in this method is you're kind of leaving those expressions, those cannabinoid expressions, up as a function of the chemical compound species and biota that are in your soil at that time. We've known a friend for a while who tried to make it his life's work to reproduce medical grade, repeatable cannabinoid profiles using living soil, and he was not able to do it for those reasons. So if you are a grower who is very worried about reproducing the exact same cannabinoid expression, you're going to have a hard time doing that by giving the control of those expressions over to a biology that most scientists, including myself, don't even fully understand.
There's just a
Question
lot
for
of
me.
variables.
Yeah.
Stress and stimulus triggers can have a huge impact on secondary metabolite production. So that's definitely something that you have to look at and account for. But who knows? Maybe we'll learn that there's a particular consortium of bacteria that only exists in bat guano, and it creates a certain secondary metabolite expression in cannabis. That's absolutely possible. That's one of the things I love about cannabis is there's so much we have to still learn about
Yep.
it.
Yep.
All right, we're running out of time though, so let's speed round this thing. Ben,
Mr. Ben,
most
most
exciting new
exciting
tool
new
or
tool or
method?
method. I gotta say, because I don't know much about it for one, and for two, it just doesn't make sense to me. But it seems to be that there are some real results there. Is this idea of underlighting? I'm really excited to see how
Hmm.
lighting companies start to test that, and see what's going on there, because plants did not evolve assuming that they're taking up light from the ground. That being said, light does reflect off the ground. So maybe it just feels like a more natural environment. I don't really know, given with how dense some of these canopies are. So there's a lot of variability and a lot of stuff there that I can see having a kind of pathway for making sense. To that, but now we're talking about adding more heat load, more light. Now we're talking about changing the environmental parameters at a pretty micro scale too. So those are all caveats that we have to wrestle with before we kind of figure out yes or no, but I'm excited about it.
I think the biggest thing that under canopy lighting offers us, it's I think a watt is a watt. At the end of the day, a photon is a photon. But by getting that light more targeted to those lower buds, we end up with, it's going to change your pruning. It allows us to maybe dial back a little bit up top and add a little bit more down below to get uh, a more consistent level of higher quality A buds versus some of the lower mids and B buds that you may see on the lower canopy that's not getting enough light. Um, I think that's the biggest thing from the research I've seen on it. But yeah, if I had a little more electricity in my grow space, I might play around with it.
Yeah.
For me, I think I would stay with lighting. This isn't necessarily new, but I think the Photon app and tool that allows you to use your phone as a light meter. I found I did a video on this. It's very accurate relative to a very expensive light meter, and being able to test your light easily and affordably is just really cool resource for folks. So that's probably the biggest thing I've seen in terms of a new tool. And then just because I have it here, Suzanne made took these photos, and Catchmaster made these cards. There's whole posters as well. And it's what common cannabis pests and cannabis insects look like on a sticky trap, which I think is really cool because that's how you're going to see them in a lot of cases if you're monitoring. So I think that's another really cool thing that's out there just in the last couple of years. So I don't have a suggestion for an EC meter. Going fast here. I like to do a runoff test if you can collect the runoff. Otherwise, if you don't have the ability to collect runoff, then yes, doing something like a slurry is also a good option. Just do it consistently every time so you can use that. Fusarium, ask us next week. That's just too long of a question to answer right now. Sorry, again, I'm just catching up with these comments as I go. Yes, some of the harvesting of bat guano does destroy the biome of the caves based on the research I've seen, damages the ecology of it. All right, do we have one more question? Okay, last one. We're going to end on this just because I don't have time to make you guys sit here while I read them all. What's the ideal par reading if I'm using average amounts of CO2 in flower? So by average, I'm going to assume you're saying ambient. So you're not adding CO2. So ambient levels of CO2 is 400 to 420 ppm. If that's the case, I would probably target around 800 ppfd for my flower, because if you go higher than that, you're not really going to see a lot of photosynthetic benefit because you don't have enough CO2. And I would also make sure that I have good airflow into the room. if I was running my par levels there, just because the plants will use up too much of that CO2 too rapidly when they're in stretch and when they're growing really rapidly in between there. So that's what I would say. If you're supplementing, let's say 1,000, 1,200 ppms of CO2 into your room, then I think you can bump up to 1,000, maybe even 1,100 ppfd in flower. But just be careful there, because as you start getting up higher, the 1,000, 1,200, you are at greater risk for light bleaching, depending on the amount of red and far red in the spectrum of your LEDs or your lights. And with HPS, probably you're more at risk of heat stress and things like that. So just be careful as you get to higher ppfds. It's always better to ramp up. Lower is better than too much. So.
And that'll be, of course, cultivar by cultivar dependent as well. You can grow.
That's a great point. Yeah.
If you have more than one cultivar, you have the environmentals the same, you have the light and the CO2 at the same. One of them may bleach and the other might be fine.
All right, thanks, guys. I'm going to read through these questions after the chat, but if you didn't get your question answered, please join us again next week. Hopefully, Brandon will be back. And thanks, Ben, for filling in.
Yeah,
appreciate you.
Of course, guys. It was fun. Thanks, guys.